analysis is compared to the threshold to determine if the impact is significant. I'm going to show you a little graphic, which I hope makes this point for those of you who are more graphic learners. But I want to make two final points here. One is that impacts are direct physical changes in the environment, and then reasonably foreseeable indirect physical changes. They are not, the law doesn't allow us to deal with things like economics or social changes, property value issues, those sorts of things. They're just not evaluated under CEQA. We're not authorized to look at them, even though they may be important. Those kinds of questions may be important to you.
Your property value.
So here's a little graphic that I hope will explain or sort of show what I mean by setting that significant threshold. So the bottom, and this, I'm using air quality as an example, and it's entirely conceptual. Think of this as being zero pollution down here, and this being a lot of pollution up here. But there's no numbers attached to it. I just want to get the concept across. So here's the current, let's call it current air pollution levels around the site. This could be the case for either ambient conditions regularly or, say, during construction. Here then are the project-generated impacts that we would have forecast or come up with based on either car trips and amount of construction equipment out on the site, etc. What we do is to set, or in our case, glean from the city and or the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, what the significance threshold should be that we're going to measure the project against. And let's just say, sorry about that. Let's just say that conceptually it's right there, okay? So everything below that is not significant. It's less than significant because you've not exceeded that threshold. That's that part of it. This part up here then is the set of impacts, and think of this as being a certain amount of air pollution dumped into the air, dust that gets stirred up by construction or whatever. That then requires us to establish mitigation measures to deal with that part of it. Okay, so you'll hear me talking about significant impacts a lot, and this is what I'm referring to, is when you get impacts up in this zone here, which are above that threshold.
Excuse me. Is noise considered an air pollution?
Noise is not considered in air pollution. It's its own separate topic. Its own topic. So, after having described that, how do we go about figuring out what a significant impact is? I want to, with your permission, actually read you quickly a little blurb here about what an adequate analysis is. What the state says to us is an adequate analysis for determining significant impacts, because I think this oftentimes helps people understand what our real role is. And it says, an EIR should be prepared with a sufficient degree of analysis to provide decision makers with information which enables them to make a decision which intelligently takes account of environmental consequences. An evaluation of the environmental effects of a proposed project need not be exhaustive, but the sufficiency of an EIR is to be reviewed in the light of what is reasonably feasible. Disagreement among experts does not make an EIR inadequate, but the EIR should summarize the main points of disagreement among the experts. And then with special emphasis, the courts have looked not for perfection, but for adequacy, completeness, and a good faith effort at full disclosure. One of the things which our response to comments document will do, and will emphasize, is any disagreement that any of you or other governmental agencies might have with the findings of the experts who were on the team and doing the work. And our job is done. Certainly we have to explain or make corrections if we erred in doing the work, but our main job is to explain the differences of opinion, and then the school board has to take a look at that and decide basically which one they tend to agree with more than others. This project doesn't have very many of those kind of issues. A lot of projects have extremely complicated air quality or water quality or hazardous materials issues where you have several PhD level analysts disagreeing almost 180 degrees. Those are complicated projects. This one is a little bit less so, but there still may be, I anticipate, some disagreement. A lot. So, in the draft EIR, the combination of that initial study that we did for this new project, plus the draft EIR, we find that there are no significant impacts in these categories here. So this is, 10 of them or something like that. I'm not going to read through them. You all can see them. Okay. Then,
how about population? population and housing, come on.
Yes?
Read through it.
Ma'am, I request to read through them first, so if I might do that. And then on the right- Let me go ahead and mention it for those of you, that's a lift on the way up there. So the things which we found would not have significant impacts. I'm sorry. Include aesthetics, agriculture and forestry resources, no surprise there. Biological resources, greenhouse gas emissions, land use and planning policy, mineral resources, population and housing, recreation, transportation and circulation, and utilities and service systems. Okay. Now, ma'am, back to you.
So are you going to go through some of these more in more detail?
I'm not planning on going through the less than.
So can you tell me a little bit about population and housing? So that would infer more housing and more population?
Yeah, this is a great example of the kind of question which I will go ahead and answer here tonight on the spot, even though a lot of questions I'm not going to be answering, but rather we're going to be responding on paper. This is a good factual question. The questions, and you'll see these questions in the initial study under the population and housing section, and they're questions which deal with whether the project would add to population and housing. And so by definition, this sort of a school project with lights and PA system and concession stand does not affect those sorts of things. A huge new town out in Manteca would have a big, big write-up on that kind of a section.
Sure. Then the second one is transportation and circulation. Are you going to address a little bit more about the transportation expected for the project?
I'm not, actually.
Okay.
It's laid out in a lot of detail in the document, both a little bit in the initial study, but mostly in the main text of the draft EIR.
Question over here.
Yes, ma'am.
How can you say that there would be no or insignificant impact on aesthetics?
That's the sort of question that we're going to write down and we're going to answer for you in writing. In other words, I don't want to get into a dialogue here of trying to explain all of the details of the document itself.
So that was really my question about...
This is Caroline Park, by the way. She is the planner on the project. She's dutifully taking very fast notes on everything that you all say.
So directly my question about the transportation and circulation was what areas of transportation and circulation were looked at for this report. I grew up in this neighborhood, I went to this high school, I'm well aware of the problems in transportation that's caused by these projects in our neighborhood on the other side of the project. So can you tell us, was that looked at all in this EIR report?
Did you come down Oak Grove?
What I will say is that the transportation analysis that was done was, I would call it extensive and yet conventional for a project of this size. We looked at trips generated and how they would get assigned, and the congestion at intersections, as well as bikes and pedestrians and buses and things like that.
So you did not specifically look at the impact of transportation for this project in the adjacent neighborhood across from the project?
We looked at it for a number of intersections, which are very clearly laid out in the document, which are all around us here, some at quite a distance.
How did you look
You're
at
still not answering my question, so I'm going to keep asking it.
I'm going to decline.
Okay, well, we have no parking signs during school hours. My family was part of having that implemented because it was such an impact on our neighborhood, the school and teachers and students parking there. So we're very concerned about what's going to happen at night when people want to use that as a cut through to come to this project.
Very good. We've got that as a comment, and I've let you make it now as part of my presentation, but I'm really going to be strict about other people's comments, because that's exactly the kind that we want to hear when I turn it over to you guys in just a little bit more.
Recreation is not being significant.
Correct.
Is not the whole purpose of this complex for recreation?
It is.
So how would that not be significant?
Again, I'm just waiting. I'm putting my little foot into waters that I prefer to wait until later to answer on paper. But I'll tell you, because this has to do with CEQA in general, this is a good mega point to make, which is, though Caroline and I might want to be kind of like architects who make projects a lot better by doing what we do, what we end up doing because of the law at CEQA, what it does more than make projects really, really good, it keeps them from being bad. And so the questions which relate to recreation have to do with, for example, if a big new high-density housing development came into a neighborhood and would impact negatively on a local park. That's the sort of question that's